Have you ever noticed that some people have to prove twice that they're good at what they do? Not because they're not competent, not because they lack credentials, but because their body doesn't fit the invisible corporate standard that nobody admits exists. Today you're going to meet Beth's story, a fat woman who won in a company where everyone bet against her, discovered the game was never about competence, and in the end, had the courage to say no to everything she fought so hard to get. 6 months after that difficult decision, she was sitting in a cafe downtown, laptop open, answering emails from the consulting business she had built. No boss, no judgment, no longer having to prove she deserved to exist. But to get there, she had to go through corporate hell, discover she was being used as a diversity marketing piece, and understand that true empowerment isn't about being accepted by the system. It's about having enough power to force the system to change or simply walk away from it. This story isn't just about fat phobia. It's about the price fat people pay to occupy spaces that were never made for them. It's about how the job market judges your body before it judges your resume. And it's about the hardest decision she ever made in her life, choosing her own dignity instead of corporate crumbs disguised as achievement. If you're fat and you've ever felt like you need to be twice as good just to be seen as half, this story is yours. If you're tired of pretending everything's fine while hearing fat-phobic jokes disguised as concern, this story is yours. And if you're thinking about giving up because it seems like you'll never be enough, stick around until the end, because what happened to her can completely change how you see your own journey. Take a deep breath, and come with me to discover how Beth brilliantly transformed years of corporate rejection into the freedom platform she always deserved. But before I begin my story, I have a small request. If stories about difficult decisions and overcoming challenges touch your heart, please let me know in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and click the like button. It always makes me happy to see how many people are out there listening to my stories. Enjoy. There's a truth that few people talk about openly, but every fat person has felt it on their skin. The job market judges your body before it even judges your resume. Beth walked into that interview room with her heart racing, MBA completed, 3 languages fluently spoken, and a success case from an international company. But all it took was the recruiter's eyes scanning her fat body up and down for everything to change. It wasn't an explicit rejection, of course it never is. It was that awkward silence, that rehearsed line, "We'll review your profile and get back to you." That forced smile that perfectly translates to, "You don't fit our visual standard of a successful professional." And the worst part, she knew it wasn't about her skills, her achievements, or her potential. It was pure and simple fat phobia disguised as cultural fit. In that moment, as she rode the elevator down with a heavy sense of defeat in her chest, she understood she would have to fight twice as hard to prove half the value that thin people had automatically recognized. But what she didn't know yet was that this fight would take place inside one of the most competitive offices in the market. When she finally got into a big corporation, it wasn't through the front doors like the thin and presentable candidates. It was through the side door of a technical position nobody wanted because it required double the work. Fat phobia in the corporate environment didn't come in a blatant way. It came in homeopathic doses of daily poison. The innocent comment from a coworker about dieting at lunchtime, the happy hour invite that never arrived, the conference room chair that creaked when she sat down while everyone glanced sideways. She noticed her ideas were systematically attributed to other people, that she needed to present data 3 times more solid than her thin colleagues to be taken seriously, that she was never chosen to represent the company at external events, because the image needs to convey credibility, as if a fat body and competence were incompatible. This story about fat people in the job market is a story of daily resistance, of swallowing humiliation with reheated coffee, of smiling when they call you cutie in a serious meeting, of pretending you didn't hear when the director makes a joke about quotas for obese people, thinking he's being funny. But she was good, better than good. She was brilliant at what she did, and results are a language that even the most deeply rooted prejudice has to respect. 6 months after starting, she delivered a project that saved the company from a multimillion-dollar loss, identified flaws nobody had seen, presented solutions that revolutionized the entire process. She expected recognition, a promotion, at least a sincere thank you. But what she got was a pat on the back and a year-end bonus smaller than her colleagues who spent the whole year slacking off. The disappointment hurt, but what hurt more was realizing that no matter how many results she delivered, she would always be the fat woman in the department, before being recognized as the exceptional professional she was. It was in that moment of deep frustration that she understood a bitter truth. The glass ceiling for fat people in corporate isn't about competence. It's about the market's refusal to put bodies that don't fit the standard in positions of visibility and power. The turning point began when she decided that if they couldn't ignore her results, she would produce results so undeniable it would be impossible not to promote her. With that strategy in mind, she worked double, arrived before everyone and left after everyone, took on projects others refused, led initiatives that transformed entire departments, built a reputation for solving the impossible. And it worked, but not the way she expected. She got the promotion, but it came with an informal condition whispered by HR. It would be interesting for you to think about taking better care of your health. The company is investing in wellness programs. The message was clear. You can move up, but you need to lose weight. She was shocked, not by the lack of awareness, she expected that, but by the cruelty of conditioning professional growth on body transformation, as if her value depended on fitting into a size 6. That night, alone in the empty office, she had to make a decision. Accept the crumbs of recognition under humiliating conditions, or fight for full respect, with no bargaining. She chose to fight, but this time with strategy, not naivety. She documented every fat-phobic comment, every unfair passing over, every time she was excluded from opportunities for not having the right visual profile, and took everything to a labor attorney specializing in discrimination. At the same time, she continued delivering absurd excellence, to the point of becoming indispensable to the company's operations, and when she finally had the decisive meeting with the board, she put all her cards on the table. Either she received the position, the salary, and the respect she deserved with no conditions related to her body, or they would have a huge discrimination lawsuit and lose the best professional they had. The room fell into a deathly silence, the kind of silence where you can feel the discomfort of powerful people realizing they underestimated someone. And for the first time in her corporate life she won. She got the promotion, the raise, the office with a window, all without having to promise she'd go on a diet or join a gym. But this victory, as important as it was just the beginning of a much bigger transformation that Beth couldn't even imagine yet. When the promotion finally came, nobody prepared this fat woman for the second battle. It wasn't just about proving she deserved the position anymore. Now she had to prove she deserved to lead. Her colleagues' looks changed in a subtle but cruel way. Those who used to ask for technical help now tested her authority in public, asking loaded questions in meetings, giggling when she needed to call someone's attention. Some said the problem was jealousy, but deep down she knew. There was a profound discomfort in seeing a fat person occupy a place many thin people thought was theirs by natural right. Fat phobia gained a new mask. It was no longer just lack of fit, now it was lack of leadership presence, as if leadership had a dress size. This story about fat people in command is much more about other people's prejudice than about actual ability. Leading while fat requires a special kind of emotional balance, because on top of dealing with goals, deadlines, and pressure from the board, she had to deal with the daily microaggressions that came disguised as feedback. You could speak more softly, they'd say, when she needed to be firm. You come across a bit scary when you assert yourself, they'd comment, as if the fat body amplified any trace of assertiveness into something threatening. A thin male colleague could slam his hand on the table and be seen as a strong leader. When she did the same, she became out of control. This is the kind of prejudice nobody admits out loud, but it shapes careers in silence. And that's why empowerment in this context isn't just a pretty Instagram phrase. It's a survival strategy. And so, she learned to calibrate her tone, to choose her battles, to understand that not every comment deserves a response, but no disrespect deserves to be normalized. 1. The most curious thing is that when Beth started leading, the ones who trusted her first were precisely the people who also didn't fit the mold. The single mom who was always rushing out to pick up her kid, the shy analyst who hated being put on the spot in meetings, the older employee who had already been discarded by other managers. They saw in their fat boss a mirror of resistance, someone who had gotten to where many doubted. And this is something few people talk about. A fat person who's conscious of their own value can become a pole of psychological safety for the team. Instead of repeating the culture of humiliation, she created an environment where nobody was ridiculed for appearance, accent, age, or way of being. In practice, this is what made productivity explode. When people aren't afraid of being ridiculed, they take more risks, make fewer mistakes, fix things quickly, create more. True leadership doesn't require a standard body. It requires character. 1. Of course, it's not all roses. There was the day she heard through the hallway a manager from another department say, "Imagine being led by a fat woman like that, I can't respect it." The sentence came like an invisible punch, the kind of violence that doesn't leave a bruise on the body but tears you apart inside. And here's an important point. Feeling pain in a situation like this doesn't mean weakness, it means humanity. The difference lies in how you respond to that pain. It's what will literally determine your success or your emotional failure. Beth could have stayed silent, pretended she didn't hear, but she chose another path. She took the case to HR, formally registered it, talked eye to eye with the aggressor in a mediated meeting. She didn't make a scene, she made a statement. She made it clear that prejudice, including fat phobia, was a breach of conduct, not a personal opinion. And again, that's where the team saw her as a true leader. Someone who doesn't diminish anyone, but also doesn't accept being diminished. For anyone listening to this story about fat people in power and thinking, okay, but what do I do with this in my reality? The answer starts with small steps. First, observe how you treat yourself at work. Do you shrink in your chair to take up less space? Do you avoid giving your opinion for fear of becoming a target? Start by adjusting your internal posture. Write down your achievements, read that inventory from time to time. Remember that nobody's doing you a favor by keeping you there. Then, practice small daily acts of empowerment. Speak up one more time in a meeting, volunteer to lead part of a project, defend someone who suffered prejudice. It's not about becoming a superhero overnight. It's about training that leadership muscle that doesn't depend on your weight. And without realizing it, these small movements will prepare the ground for the next level of this story, which is when she discovers that the true test of leadership doesn't come from above, but from what happens when the pressure increases and the masks start to fall. One of the most painful lessons Beth learned in leadership was that not every smile is sincere, and not every partnership survives someone else's success. During her first months as a manager, she had formed a solid alliance with Peter, a colleague at the same hierarchical level who seemed genuinely supportive of her rise, who celebrated her victories, who stayed after hours helping prepare important presentations. They had lunch together, exchanged advice about managing people, laughed at the same unfunny corporate jokes. She even considered Peter a true friend in that competitive and cold environment, someone who understood the difficulties of leading in a place where prejudice was more present than the coffee in the break room. But what she didn't know yet was that all this closeness was being strategically built while waiting for the right moment to destroy her. And that moment was closer than she imagined. The betrayal began in a sneaky way, like poison being placed little by little so it won't be detected. Peter started making innocent comments about her health in meetings. "Wow, you look tired, aren't you overloading yourself too much? Have you thought about getting a checkup? We need to take care of our health to lead well." At first, she even thought it was genuine concern. After all, work was really demanding. But when the comments started being made in front of the board, always with that paternalistic tone of someone who's worried about their colleagues' well-being, she realized the game. He was planting the seed of doubt about her physical capacity to sustain leadership. Pay attention to what I'm about to say now. Fat phobia never comes head-on when it's articulated by smart people. It comes wrapped in care, concern for health. Aren't you overdoing it? This story about fat people who reach power is also a story about how prejudice changes tactics, but not its objective: to remove you from where you don't belong, according to them. The final blow came in a strategic meeting with the company's presidency, when Beth was presenting an ambitious project that would take the company to another level. She had worked months on it, validated every number, tested every hypothesis, and was confident. In the middle of the presentation, Peter raised his hand and with that friendly smile of his said, "Sorry to interrupt, but I think it's important we consider whether we have the right team to execute something of this magnitude, right? It's not a question of competence, but of energy, availability, physical stamina to handle the pressure." The silence that filled the room was deafening. Everyone understood what was being said between the lines, that she was too fat, therefore didn't have the physical stamina to lead something big. The humiliation was so deep that suddenly the air left Beth's throat, her eyes became dry and hard, but at the same time something in her awakened. A cold, calculated anger that made her think, "Not today, not here, not with me." Instead of crumbling, she looked directly at Peter with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and responded with surgically rehearsed calm. "Peter, you're right to question execution capacity, so let's look at the facts. In the last 6 months, my team delivered 100% of projects on time, with an internal satisfaction rate of 92%, while yours delivered 70% with documented complaints about overload. As for physical stamina, I work an average of 12 hours a day including weekends, so if the concern is about dedication, I'm fine. Now, if the concern is about my body, I think HR has some policies about discrimination we can review together after this meeting." The atmosphere changed instantly. The presidency, which seconds before seemed to be considering Peter's comment, now looked at him with discomfort. The poison had been thrown back, but this time mixed with an antidote called data, facts, and firm positioning. This is the kind of empowerment you don't learn at a motivational lecture. You learn it from the beating of real life when you decide that respect is not on the negotiation table. After that meeting, the relationship with Peter obviously shipwrecked, but what was most interesting was what happened behind the scenes. Several people in the company, whom she didn't even imagine were paying attention, started reaching out to her to share similar situations they had experienced, to thank her for confronting prejudice head-on, to say they wanted to learn to position themselves that way. Beth then realized that Peter's betrayal, as painful as it had been, had served to expose something much bigger. Fat phobia in corporate only works when it's silent, when nobody dares to name it, when the victim stays quiet out of fear or shame. The moment you stop swallowing and start returning it with intelligence, the game changes completely. And it was exactly this change in posture, this understanding that you can't be a leader without being political and strategic, that prepared her for the next chapter of this journey, when she would have to face not just one treacherous colleague anymore, but an entire system built to keep her small. And there are moments in life when the truth hits you like a slap in the face. And that's exactly what happened on an ordinary Thursday when she was finishing reports in the empty office after 8 p.m. Her computer froze, and the IT tech, a bit awkwardly, asked if he could use his machine while he fixed the problem. She agreed, opened his corporate email to send an urgent document, and accidentally saw a thread of old messages with the subject, Diversity Project Q2. Curiosity killed the cat, the saying goes, but sometimes curiosity is what frees you from illusions. She clicked, and what she read in the following minutes destroyed months of naive hope. Her promotion hadn't been based on merit. It had been a marketing strategy. The company was being sued for discrimination, the press was all over it, and someone in the board had the brilliant idea to promote a fat employee to show commitment to diversity. She was the fat body that cleaned up the corporate image, not the exceptional professional who deserved to be there. The shock was so great that she had to leave the room, go to the bathroom, and breathe deeply to keep from throwing up from anger and sadness mixed together. All those months believing she had won, that she had proven her value, that she had broken the glass ceiling with competence, crumbled in seconds. Fat phobia hadn't been defeated. It had been covered up with makeup. They didn't respect her, they used her. And the worst part is that she had given her blood, had worked double, had swallowed humiliations, all thinking she was building a real path, when in reality she was being a piece in a cynical public relations game. This story about fat people in corporate power carries a brutal truth that few people admit. Many companies don't want real inclusion, they want pretty photos to post on Diversity Day. Full of resentment. Yes, Beth is human. She realized the prejudice remained intact, they just changed the packaging. She ran her wet, cold hands over her face, took a deep breath, and went back to her desk, copied all the emails, screenshots of internal conversations, meeting minutes where they openly discussed how to use the plus-size employee to improve the company's image. She saved everything in an encrypted folder, not for immediate revenge, but because now she understood the dimension of the game. Information is power, and she had just found heavy ammunition. In the following days, she continued working normally, but inside she was processing a pain that few can measure. It wasn't just anger at the company, it was anger at herself for believing, for trusting, for thinking she would finally be seen for what she was really worth. Fake empowerment hurts more than open rejection, Because it makes you believe you've won when in reality they just put you in a golden cage with invisible bars. And worse, how many other fat people, black people, trans people, people with disabilities, were in that same company living the same illusion, thinking they had earned respect when they were just serving as a shield against lawsuits. Anger, when well channeled, becomes fuel for historic decisions. And that's exactly what happened. She scheduled a private meeting with the company's presidency, brought a flash drive with all the documents, and literally put it on the table. "I found out," she said with frightening calm, "that my promotion was part of the diversity project to improve the company's image after the discrimination lawsuit. You used me as a token, as propaganda, as a fat body that washes the dirty corporate reputation. So now you have two options. Either we make a deal where this company actually changes its internal culture, with real inclusion policies, mandatory training on prejudice, and a public and auditable commitment to true diversity, or I go to the press with all of this and tell the complete story of how you manipulate the inclusion narrative." The silence that fell over the room was the kind of silence where you can hear your heart beating. Beth's face was cold and enigmatic. She wasn't bluffing, and they knew it. What happened after that meeting changed not only her life, but the lives of hundreds of employees who were tired of pretending that company was inclusive. The presidency accepted the terms, but not out of kindness, out of fear of the damage it would cause if it leaked. They implemented real policies, hired consultants specializing in true diversity and inclusion, created anonymous reporting channels, and most importantly, she gained autonomy to lead these changes from within. Beth became, ironically, the person responsible for transforming the facade project into real transformation. It was in this process of transformation from victim to protagonist of her own story that she understood the most valuable lesson. True empowerment isn't about being accepted by the system. It's about having enough power to force the system to change, even if it resists tooth and nail, even if it means tough confrontations and choices that will determine who you really are when nobody's watching. After the storm passed and the diversity policies were implemented, Beth expected to feel relief, maybe even pride, but the feeling that came was a strange emptiness, an exhaustion that wouldn't go away even with vacation. She'd wake up at dawn wondering if it was worth continuing at that company that only changed because it was forced to, if it made sense to dedicate her energy to a place that saw her as a problem solved and not as a complex human being. Meetings now had anti-discrimination protocols, mandatory training happened every quarter, but she could feel in some directors' looks the poorly disguised resentment, as if she were the annoying one who ruined the corporate comfort zone party. Institutional fat phobia had decreased, yes, but the price was high. She had become the fat HR activist, and no matter how many brilliant projects she delivered, that label stuck more than any professional achievement. And it was in this emotional limbo that the question arose that would change everything. Stay and consolidate the changes, or leave and recover the peace she no longer had. The pressure to stay came from all sides, especially from the people she had helped empower within the company. "You can't leave now, we need you here," said the fat, black LGBTQA+ employees who finally had someone who understood them in a position of power. And she felt the weight of that responsibility like a backpack full of stones. If she left, who would guarantee that everything wouldn't go back to the way it was before? Who would hold the line when the board tried to loosen the policies? This is a cruel trap that empowerment sometimes creates. You become hostage to your own activism, prisoner of a cause that should liberate you. Because here's the truth: nobody talks about being the first fat person to break barriers in a hostile environment. You're not just a pioneer, you're also a human shield for those who come after. And nobody warns you that shields break, crack, bleed inside until they can't take it anymore. On the other hand, the temptation to leave was real and pulsed strongly in her chest every time she saw a job opening at another company, every time she received a LinkedIn invitation, every time she imagined what it would be like to work in a place where she didn't have to prove anything, where she could just be good at what she does without carrying the diversity flag on her back all the time. She had become a reference in the market, a sought-after speaker, a strong name in corporate diversity, and that opened doors that were previously locked with padlocks. But wouldn't leaving now be a betrayal? Wouldn't it be abandoning the fight in the middle? She found herself thinking about these questions in an infinite loop, and the answer was never simple. Until one night, talking with a friend who was also fat and had been through a similar situation, she heard something that changed her perspective. You don't have to be a martyr. Saving the company isn't your job. Your job is to live well, grow, be happy. If this place doesn't give you that, it doesn't matter how many policies you implemented. You have the right to leave. That conversation with her friend had the power to lift a giant, invisible weight off her back. The decision came on a Monday morning when she was preparing yet another presentation on diversity metrics for the board and realized she didn't feel anything anymore. Not anger, not pride, not purpose. Just a deep tiredness of someone living on autopilot. She closed her laptop, took a deep breath, and made the hardest and most liberating decision of her life. She was going to leave, but she was going to leave her way, without guilt, without drama, without burning bridges. She scheduled a meeting with the presidency and communicated with elegance and determination. I appreciate the opportunity to have led these transformations, but it's time for me to follow a new path. I'll leave everything documented. I'll train the person who takes my place, but I'm not staying anymore. The president tried to negotiate, offered a raise, proposed partnership, promised total autonomy, but she had already decided. Because this story about fat people and empowerment also needs to include the chapter where you learn that choosing yourself isn't selfishness, it's survival, and that sometimes the greatest victory isn't transforming the system. It's having the courage to leave it when it no longer serves you. The last 3 months at the company were strange, like that phase of a relationship that's already over but hasn't made it official yet. She fulfilled everything she promised. Documented processes, trained her successor, an incredible black fat woman she herself recommended, made the transition with impeccable professionalism. But what surprised her most was people's reactions. Some were genuinely sad, others relieved. Some even confessed they were envious of her courage to leave. And on the last day, when she was emptying her desk, packing up the picture frames and personalized pens, she looked out the office window and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness. It wasn't regret, it wasn't doubt. It was the clear feeling that she had done the right thing. Because she had faced the prejudice, she had implemented the policies, she had left a legacy, but the life ahead was hers, only hers, and nobody was going to dictate the pace, the weight, the size, or the value of what she could be anymore. And with that certainty in her chest, she left that company not as someone who was defeated, but as someone who had finally understood that true empowerment is knowing when to fight and when to leave, and that both choices can be victorious, depending on who you want to be when you look in the mirror 10 years from now. 6 months after leaving that company, she was sitting in a charming cafe downtown, laptop open, answering emails from clients of the consulting business she had built. She had no boss, didn't have to ask permission to go to the bathroom, no longer had to swallow fatphobic comments disguised as jokes. Life as a freelancer had its challenges, of course, but for the first time in years she was breathing without feeling the weight of constant judgment about her fat body. And the most interesting part, the clients who sought her out now didn't ask about diets, didn't suggest wellness tips. They just wanted the excellent work she always delivered, and they were willing to pay well for it. Her LinkedIn exploded after she posted a sincere text about having left the company due to institutional fat phobia. Thousands of fat people commented thanking her for naming what they were experiencing in silence, and serious companies, those that actually invest in diversity not just in marketing, started reaching out. She received 3 invitations to give talks about real inclusion in the corporate environment, was called for HR consultancies, and even became a columnist for a major portal talking about career and fat bodies. The funny thing is she didn't plan to become a reference. She just decided to stop accepting crumbs and speak the truth without fear. And that's exactly what made her someone people wanted to hear. Because in a market full of people selling illusions, authenticity became rare currency. Beth learned that true empowerment isn't about becoming a hero. It's about real life, recovering the basic right to exist with dignity. And that's something nobody can take from you unless you allow it. She allowed it for years, until one day she decided she wasn't going to allow it anymore. And it was that decision, more than any promotion or external recognition, that changed everything in this woman's life. If my story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe to the channel.